It's a real humbling moment and an honor to be speaking in front of this audience as a keynote here. You reflect back on your career and think as a grad student and as a postdoc and when you're starting a faculty position and how you want to do something that really honors the type of efforts that demands a crowd like this. And so I'm really excited to share with you what I'm going to frame as a grounding point for a field that's really emerging at the interface of technology and neuroscience. But my goals today, and I know we have both a lot of cognitive neuroscientists and the public here, is to really give, as I describe here, a vision of the future and hopefully a call to arms about what we can do in this new field. I want to frame it not from the perspective of cognition at all. I just want to talk first about human performance and really how us humans have always sort of been consumed with this notion of high-level performance. And in no world is that more evident than in the domain of physical fitness, where there's really been this global obsession with optimal fitness, right? And if you look across every domain of fitness, from strength, endurance, coordination, flexibility, balance, power, speed, you see that there are specialized equipment, practitioners, all devoted to optimizing these abilities, right? And it goes across many different aspects. So it could be from entertainment like Cirque du Soleil to athletics and sports to health and wellness, and then all the way at the extreme, rehab and medicine. Which really begs the question, what are we doing to optimize this, right? The core of what makes us most human, our cognition, our attention, our perception, our memory, decision-making, emotional regulation, and at the very top, our compassion and wisdom. And I'd say in this regard, in terms of optimizing our cognitive abilities, we're really tragically lacking. So let's break this down a moment. We could try to improve cognition in young developing minds. We'd say that would sort of be the purview of what we'd think of as education. But there we've almost seen this completely focused approach on transferring information content, but not really building the underlying information processing systems that depends upon. For adults, keeping our brains healthy throughout our lives, that would be, I guess, wellness. But everything's sort of been marginalized as alternative in that domain. And then the world that I'm from, neurology and psychiatry, it's treating deficits in those that are suffering from them. And we have numerous hurdles in that world as well. And that's what I want to do first, is to tell you why this field should exist. That's the first point that I want to make. So let's talk about the current approach to enhancing cognition in both healthy people and those suffering deficits. The first challenge that we face is that we have very poor assessments. So in the medical world, when someone goes to their physician and they have, let's say, an attention problem or a mood problem, we almost never know exactly what's going on inside their brains. All the amazing tools that you use of cognitive neuroscience really sit firmly in the scientific enterprise and do not translate into the clinical practice. Same thing in the classroom. Do we really know what's going on inside the brains of those young people who we're trying to teach? So I would say that without having those assessments available, we're really missing the opportunity to have targeted improvement. And that's the next problem. We don't need to know what's going on in order to treat, right? Or at least that's the way that we've been going about it. But the problem is that we have very poorly targeted treatments. In the medical world, we have these, pharmaceutical, small molecules, and there's nothing inherently wrong with this approach. But for over 50 years, we've been trying to develop molecules to improve cognition, and we really have not one major win. And because they're poorly targeted, acting more globally on neurotransmitter systems, but not on the underlying computational unit of the brain, the neural network, we have to increase our doses to very high levels to get the effects we want, and we get just as many side effects as effects. And that's basically what neurologists and psychiatrists spend their time doing and managing those. Same thing with the classroom. We're not really targeting any of the education process to actually building the cognitive systems that it relies on. The other big problem is that they're completely non-personalized system. So we make our prescriptive advice based on large population studies that completely ignore all the individual differences of the brains in those studies. Same thing with curriculum in classrooms. They're not really focusing on the individual. The other problem is that practitioners, not the finest in the world, but many treat each of these, sort of the incumbents, as a holy grail. Right? So one pill without even paying attention to things that we know are so critical, like physical exercise. Same thing, didactic education being the entire circle of education. The biggest problem is that we have open loop systems. And so what an open loop is this very poorly quantitative, sloppy, long cycle between how we intervene and how we update. You take a pill, you go home, you subjectively monitor your effects and your side effects. You go back to your doctor, it could be months later, and then we go up or down 5 milligrams, right? The art of medicine. And I'd say that's really not good enough. We see the same thing in the classroom. The exams are not really updating the education for that particular student. So these are the major hurdles that we face, and they're really big hurdles. For 2017, to have these in a global system of cognitive improvement is a big problem. So what we need to do is think of how do we build something that's targeted, personalized, multimodal, and closed loop to at least work in parallel with our current system. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So how do we do that? So we, right here in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and we tend to think that technology can do everything. This is an overinflated statement, but it's worth considering how technology can play a role here. And I first want to frame this that I am acutely aware of the challenges that technology places upon our brains. And I just wrote a book called The Distracted Mind with the subtitle, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. And I'm not going to talk about this all today, but I do think that we see lots of examples of technology really challenging our cognitive control abilities. So with that framing, with knowing that technology is a powerful behavioral tool, and also knowing that we have these fundamental limitations that are being challenged by technology, how do we, as my friend Jon Favreau, writer and actor, said, I want to find the humanity in the technology. How do we think about technology in this way? And this is a critical time to start doing that in a deeper manner. Because right now we have the consumerization of virtual reality, augmented reality, motion capture, wearable physiological devices, and machine learning and other artificial intelligence systems. I'm going to estimate this, but I'm going to say 90% at least of this is targeted to entertainment, media, communication. How do we now, as scientists, get out in front of it and start using this technology to find the humanity in it, and ideally to improve our cognition? So that's really the challenge that I want to place in front of you. Now, how can we even think that this technology, and including the technology that's sitting in your pockets now, can do something as amazing as improve our cognitive abilities? And at its core, it's not actually that complicated. At least the basis is really strong. It's because with technology, we can create powerful experiences. And experiences are the gateway to our brain's plasticity. Right, that complex change that occurs at every level, structure, function, and chemistry in response to experience, right? I'd say this is a non-contentious point that all neuroscientists agree on, that this is a foundation of learning. We know how strong this relationship is, right? You can witness, not just get shrapnel in your brain, witness a single tragic event and detrimentally impact the function of your brain for the rest of your life, something we call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So I think that the challenge for all of us is to think about how do we create new technologies that build experiences or leverage existing technologies that maximally harness the brain's plasticity to lead to improvements in our cognition, refining our behavior, and ultimately elevating our minds at the highest level. How do we do that? Well, not all experiences are created equal. So I would say that the experiences that we want to create, and sort of going back to the point that I just made previously, are closed-loop experiences. So let me break this down. I think this is my most important point that I want to pass on today. A closed loop is where you intervene in some way, and this could be in biological or physical systems, and you record the impact with as low latency as possible. So ideally in real time, you're intervening, you're recording, and then you're going back and refining that intervention based on the data, going a little more if it was not enough, or, or pulling back if it was too much. Applying, recording, refining, cycling over and over again, at each pass becoming more targeted and more personalized to the system you're trying to change. This, I believe, is the way forward in using technology in this manner. How do we create closed-loop systems? Well, in our lab, we've had a focus on video games. Now, video games, as I'm sure you're all aware, are a very powerful form of interactive media that has these ability to change behaviors, which is why there's controversy about video games, particularly those that have high levels of violent content. But it's exactly those aspects of it that make it so exciting to build closed-loop systems to help improve brain function. So let's step through a cartoon of how this would work. So you're playing a game. Of course, it's your brain playing that game. And while you play, the game in real time can record performance metrics, how fast you are, how accurate you are. And then it can update the environment. So it could scale the challenge of the game appropriate to your ability in that moment. You don't have to enter how old you are, if you have autism or not. The game automatically understands where you are, at least given the metrics that are going in, and then can challenge you. Right at that level where it's not so hard that it's frustrating, not so easy that it's boring, and really create this closed-loop system that applies pressure to that network that was targeted selectively by the game mechanics. So this is the very basic idea. The other thing that can happen in real time is that the game could give you feedback and rewards. And every game designer in the world knows that this is the most powerful way to create engagement and immersion inside a video game. Then we could layer on some other technologies that we talked about. So motion capture, right? You could go into Best Buy and buy a Kinect, at a very low cost that can capture motion in 3D space. Physiological recordings. Many people around here wear devices that usually yield unactionable data. But this data could flow into the game engine, and now the game, the software, could understand you at a deeper level and make changes that are more indicative of endpoints that need to be optimized. And we could use tools like augmented reality, where you overlay a digital world upon the real world, or virtual reality, to create even more real-world immersive engaging experiences. And then we could wrap around this all, machine learning algorithms, other AI approaches, to create a truly integrated multimodal closed-loop system. So this is sort of a snapshot of where I believe we should be heading to build technology to have this targeted closed-loop approach on improving cognition. So let me make this a little less abstract and tell you about my first foray into this domain. In 2008, I asked myself in my lab, could we build a custom-designed video game using closed-loop algorithms to enhance cognitive control abilities in older adults? And I define that as a triad of attention and all the different subtypes of attention, working memory, and multitasking and other types of goal management task switching. The hypothesis was that if we could use a closed-loop video game to apply consistent pressure to one of these abilities, in this case multitasking, we would see benefit in other abilities that are related to it. And so the hypothesis is really based, and this is sort of the cognitive neuroscience piece of this, on tons of data. This is from our own lab, but many other labs showing that cognitive control is mediated by these overlapping networks that involve the prefrontal cortex and many other areas of the brain. Mostly we studied visual cortex and its relationship with top-down modulation. And the other aspect that there's just as much data for in many ways is that these processes and the cognitive abilities associated with them are impaired with healthy aging. So I'm not talking about dementia here. So I think that this is an important point, is that this field that we're talking, and I sort of think of it as translational neuroscience, is really intimately interwoven with our basic neuroscience understanding. That's critical, that you're really targeting and building hypotheses on what even has the potential to lead to transfer. The next challenge was to build a video game, which I don't know about what your laboratories look like, but certainly in 2008, ours was not set up to build something that was continuous, interactive, with high rewards and engagement. And so I reached out to friends of mine that worked at LucasArts, and I asked if they would come down to our lab and help us build this video game that I designed, this multitasking challenge. And I found out that if you offer sushi and beer to even AAA video game professionals, they will come down and donate time. And so we spent a year building a game that on its surface doesn't look much more complex than like pole position, but it was really working under the hood and understanding those adaptive algorithms and the reward systems involved. So this is what NeuroRacer looks like. You drive a car into a 3D environment using a joystick on a laptop, maintaining the car going left, right, pushing up if the hill goes up, and then you respond as rapidly and accurately to these signs, target signs like green circles, not red circles, not green pentagons. So really what we have here is a visual motor tracking task overlaid with a visual perception task. Now, if you were to do this, and anyone, this is true for, and we've done extensive pilot testing, you tend to trade off between these. Even if you're not aware of it, it's very hard to do them both at a high level at the same time. And the level is high because the game is constantly adapting to put you around that 70% performance level. So what we decided to do to prevent that, or to at least have people try to multitask, because that was the hypothesis. We wanted them to deal with the interference, not just trade off. We coupled across the two tasks with a reward cycle. So in order to level up in NeuroRacer, you have to get better on the next trial on both of the tasks. And one thing we learned is that everyone, including 80-year-olds, want to level up in video games. It's just a core part of being a human being. So we took advantage of that. So that's an example. This is our first game that we created of weaving together adaptivity and feedback to drive the system in a very targeted way, the way that we wanted to. And then we spent the next 3 years doing research on it. I'm just going to show you a little bit of data today. Multitasking performance here is defined as the drop in performance. So 0%, the red line means that you are multitasking perfectly. That means that you're doing that sign task, the targeting task, just as well when you do it alone compared to when you layer on the secondary task. And we looked first using the video game as a diagnostic of both behavioral performance and neural activity. And I'll tell you the neural data in a second. And then to see, can it be used as a training tool? So what you're looking at here on the x-axis is 20-year-olds up to 80-year-olds. So the first thing we did was we had 20-year-olds come down. We actually screened out all the video game playing 20-year-olds. So we found like the only 15 males in San Francisco, locked them in our lab for the duration of the experiment. And we took a look at what their multitasking performance was like on the game. Now, I don't know where you're all from, but in San Francisco, 20-year-olds believe they are multitasking masters, right? Practicing it all day long. What we found is 27% drop in performance when you put them together. Now, we've already have well over a dozen studies showing that even if you normalize the single tasks, which is what we did here. So if you're an 80-year-old, you're going to have a multitasking deficit. So if a 20-year-old was watching the 80-year-old play the game, they'd say that's a much easier version of the game. The road's going a lot slower. They have a lot more time for the signs. But in a experiment beforehand, we found out their performance on those tasks independently and then just overlaid them. So it's not just the deficit on the tasks themselves, it's really where they collide together. Now, we already know that 70-year-olds have a difficult time multitasking on every test we've ever used. The question is, what happens? Do you maintain this performance during your life at this level, only to plummet in one tragic year when you're 69 years old? Or do you plummet every tragic year of your life, which is what we find here? Now, this is the first time that this has been shown for multitasking performance, and certainly the first time using a continuous video game interface to show it. But we see this for many other examples of cognitive abilities. Even processing speed alone shows this, as well as working memory and other metrics of attention. The next thing we wanted to do, one last thing I want to point out here is that we were able to show that even between 20 and 30-year-olds, we were able to actually show a significant difference in multitasking performance, which is pretty impressive considering the N wasn't very high, and considering 20 and 30-year-olds are pretty closely matched on a lot of abilities. So it does show you how this type of interface, which is very different than the ones that I certainly grew up with in this field, can yield pretty sensitive measures of behavior. What we also wanted to do is take a look at neurally what was going on. So all of our participants had 64-channel EEG recordings done while they were playing a diagnostic version of this game. And we asked the question, what's going on in their brains at the most challenging multitasking moment, when you're driving the car on the road and the sign comes up? So if we time lock to 0 right at the beginning of the sign, and we look for a metric known as midline frontal theta, which is a burst of low-frequency activity from the prefrontal cortex, the most evolved part of our brain, the part that really coordinates a lot of these cognitive control abilities. And the first thing we said, OK, let's look at the 20-year-olds who are performing at a much higher level. And so what you're looking at here is called a topography plot. We won't go into details, but the nose is pointing up, the ears are to the side, and you could see that yellow blob in the front part of the brain. And if you look at the scale there, somehow red is not red, but pink, but that's a heat scale, so you could see it's around 2/3 up. And this burst of activity occurs like 1/3 of a second after a sign comes up, and by 800 milliseconds, and before the second is done, it's back down to baseline. If you take a look at our older adults, this is what we see. So there's a burst there, but it's certainly not at the same level. And this mimics much of the other data in the field showing that cognitive control deficits are often associated with prefrontal cortical engagement impairment or network impairment in so many different ways that you could look at this, converge upon this finding. So the next question was, what happens when you train on this video game in a closed loop fashion? And so we performed our training study, which was 12 hours over 1 month. So that was 1 hour a day, 3 days a week for 4 weeks. And this was only on the older adults, so healthy 60 to 80-year-olds. So first we brought back another group. We replicated this aging finding. We had them go home and train in this adaptive fashion that I described to you. And when they came back, this is what their performance and their brain activity looked like. So It is pretty dramatic. That should be red. I don't know what's going on with our connection, but pretty dramatic improvement in performance and also the engagement of the prefrontal cortex. Now, I know what a lot of you are saying, this is a practice effect, and I agree, it is. But when you watch a 70-year-old that never really played a video game before, 1 month later come back and see what they play like, it's really impressive. And so to see that change, where they exceed the level of multitasking on the game, even beyond many 20-year-olds, and then to find that neural change was a pretty exciting finding for us. The other thing we found is when we brought them back 6 months later after pulling the laptop away from them, and found that we were really actually surprised to find that they maintained their ability to multitask on the game. No significant drop. If we had realized that this was going to happen, we would have done a lot more testing at 6 months, and we're currently doing those type of sustainability studies. I just want to show you one other piece of data. This is a little video of the topography. It's not part of the paper. It's sort of a little side image. But the same adults before and after training, and you're just going to look at that prefrontal cortical activity, that midline frontal theta change over just a little over a half a second, 600 milliseconds. Same people before and after training. So you could see that there's a lot more than just the peak that it reaches. There's a change in, it starts earlier, the extent is bigger, it lasts longer. There's just a massive amount of what I would describe as functional plasticity here. And we don't have MRI at this particular time, so we can't see other aspects of structural plasticity, but I assume that at some level, whether or not you could see with MRI, that it's accompanied by those type of changes as well. But perhaps the most exciting finding here was that we were able to confirm our hypothesis, that we showed that working memory for faces over short periods of time, even when interrupted by other tasks or distractions, as well as a very boring vigilance task known as the TOVA, attention span task, improved if you look from before to after training. Now, we had two control groups. One control group did nothing, just to look for practice effects in these outcome measures, and there was no change. And then another group played a single task version of NeuroRacer. And they did not show any improvement in their ability to multitask on the game, nor did they show any transfer to these other abilities. So the point is not that playing a video game for a month leads to these changes, but we would say that the active ingredient here, to borrow a term from the pharmaceutical industry, is the act of multitasking or dealing with this interference conflict that we were presenting them with. So one last thing is that we found that not everyone shows this effect to the same degree. Those that show it the most robustly also showed the most transfer of benefits to that attention span task and the most sustained benefits multitasking in the game 6 months later. So we start to put together a mechanistic story here that there's a connection between the game mechanics, the changes in the brain, and the performance that we're seeing. And the ultimate win would be the transfer to other abilities and the sustainability over long periods of time. The conclusions that we reached were two, that the closed-loop video game training targeted interference processing enhances cognitive control in older adults, and that the improvement is associated with modulation of prefrontal cortical networks. I didn't present any of the network data today, but all of that's in the paper. And you could see we were excited to have this published in Nature at the end of 2013. It was the cover of the journal for a lab. This is as exciting as it gets. But I really put this up for one reason. You could see that Nature used a pun that, of course, we loved of game changer. But this has really tortured me for the last 3.5 years. And really because it forces me to message all the time, which is fair, that I don't know if this particular game is a game changer. I hope that that's not the takeaway. But if there's anything here, and only time will tell, it's that you could work carefully with professionals in an entirely different industry that are also experts, like the game developers, designers, artists, engineers that we worked with to build this for a year, and then do a very carefully controlled study, ideally using neural measures to understand mechanism. That is what I hope the game changer is, that there is a methodology that needs to be applied if you're going to take technology, especially those sitting in the entertainment domain, and move it into our world. And I'm not saying that this is the perfect example of that. I never try to overstate these as being anything more than a signal. And I think given the convergence of both the neural data and the behavioral data, even though there's a small n here, there's a signal to us that something meaningful happened by this training. Certainly not enough data for me to give this out as prescriptive advice. I don't tell anyone to play NeuroRacer to get better at their attention abilities. But there's enough to move on and to do a deeper dive and to take it to the next level. So that's what I want to tell you now, what that involves. And that story is not done, but it's an interesting one. So I did not want this to be born and to end as a Nature paper, as exciting as that is as academic. I really wanted this to get into people's hands. And the thing that I realized very quickly is that we could not build a product inside an academic laboratory. We could build a prototype, but at least in our hands, to take it to that highest level where it's really scalable and can be delivered broadly was beyond our means and not really our goal. And so for that, I had to learn how to navigate this sort of complicated tightrope of industry and academics. And so I filed a patent behind the methodology of NeuroRacer. And then I helped form a company with friends from LucasArts and a biotech venture group in Boston. And we formed this company called Achille. I keep my day job at the university. I serve as an advisor for this company. And what has happened since then is the company's now licensed that patent from UCSF. UCSF is the owner of that patent, and created a much, much better game than we could ever have in our lab. So the game is called EVO. Project EVO stands for Evolution. It is a game that uses the exact same mechanics that I described to you, but way higher levels of art, music, story, usability, engagement. You know, we have a full team of AAA video game professional developers working on this for years now. Now, the interesting and somewhat polarizing part of this story is that you can't buy this game. So there's no marketing budget. You can't download this on iTunes. This game is fully behind research doors now to do what we did not do in our first study, which is take it to that next level to create truly prescriptive advice from this. So now there are extensive tests trying to validate this at the highest level as a medical, clinical, diagnostic, and therapeutic tool. These are some of the populations, so autism, anxiety, PTSD, depression, TBI. We have a study that we're starting in Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis. All of these are going on in parallel. I'm not really working on any of these studies. So that's another important part here, is that you move it on, let your colleagues validate it, take it to the next level. I just want to tell you about one study. So we just launched at the end of last year, Achille did, a study on ADHD. This is a phase 3 FDA clinical validation study. It was pre-submitted to the FDA to get a clinical indication for this game as a treatment for children with ADHD. That data will read out at the end of this year. There are 9 sites involved in that. If it hits the endpoints with the side effect profiles that we placed upon it, it would be the first FDA non-drug treatment for ADHD and the first prescribable video game. So we will see where that takes us. It's really exciting to see it going there, and also to see the openness on the part of the FDA to think about what we position really as a digital medicine that we think could run in parallel with molecular medicines. So that's that story. Meanwhile, back in the lab, we had this challenge, right? It's like our baby grew up and went off to college, and the best thing we could do is not like go there with them and like hang out with them all the time, right? We had to like let them go and grow up. And that was really disorienting because we put a lot into this project. And so what we did was go back to where we felt most excited and most comfortable, which was in that incubation phase of building things from scratch and just doing the mechanistic side of the work to figure out, is there a signal there? And my lab became large. We now have 6 faculty, and we created a center called Neuroscape, where the goal is to do exactly what I've been talking to you about, bridging tech, really non-invasive consumer technology with neuroscience, both methodology and validation, as well as inspiring and building the interactive media itself. And so I just want to show you a couple pictures of what it looks like. That's our new neuroscience building. This is on the Mission Bay campus, like 10 minutes away from here. On the bottom, you see one of our 3 new Neuroscape research labs. So we really had to build entirely new labs that we never had before. So you could see on your left is the control room, which lets us step out of the experimental room, similar to how a lot of you might do experiments, stepping out of a scanner room. And you could see that there we get to present the new technology and the interactive challenges that we create. And then on the right side is one of our experimental rooms, where if you were a participant in our study, you would come down, especially if it's a non-mobile device, and I'll tell you about that, non-mobile training, and you would do an experiment, maybe come down there for an entire month while you engage in one of our studies. And I'm going to come back to what we do in here, but I just want to tell you a little bit about what we think about the intervention incubation process. And this is another aspect of this that's so critical that we think about all the time. And we really think that there are 2 pillars to this, the technology development and then the research side of it, the research study side of it. And that both of these are critical. If you do research studies on a crappy intervention, you're probably not going to find anything. It's just the way it works. And then if you build something amazing, but it's not inspired to really target processes that need to be optimized and you don't validate it, then it's going to live forever largely as an entertainment product. So we think that you really have to couple these, and that is the supreme challenge. And we outlined a lot of this in a Neuron paper in 2016 that just came out, so you can read more details there. But I just want to highlight a bit of what goes into it. I mean, the development process is massive. We built our own interactive media team at Neuroscape, but we work with professionals across these domains because we don't have the resources to have all of these aspects covered. And then on the research side, there's another hour discussion about what goes into doing a careful study on a behavioral type of intervention in this way. And I'm going to bring one more slide up and talk about that closer to the end. So let's talk about tech development and the things that are important to us. Obviously, mobile and wireless is incredibly exciting, as it is for everyone, right? The accessibility of it. So, and it's not just the devices that deliver the software, but physiological devices like mobile EEG caps that are starting to get to the level that we're seeing almost exactly the same data collected in the field as collected in our laboratory. So it's getting there. It's close. It's not quite there, but it will be there. And as you could see on this other image, this is a study on one of our video games, Metatrain, a meditation-inspired video game of foster children in India playing this game. So again, the accessibility. This is a project led by Jyoti Mishra. Very exciting to know that these tools, where we have trouble getting doctors and teachers, are really going to be completely ubiquitous, right? Everyone will have a mobile device very soon in the near future. It's getting very close to that right now. One other mobile tool that we're very excited about is called ACE. What we did here was take our understanding of these adaptive algorithms and not build something like a video game that's meant to be a training tool, but just a rapid way of sampling cognitive abilities using adaptive algorithms. And so ACE is an iPad app that's a series of modules that lets you rapidly sample all the different cognitive control abilities and just threshold them. So there's no floor or ceiling effects. It's very easy to do comparisons, and you can distribute this mobily. And so our goals for this are to be able to do what we call mobile randomized controlled trials. So the challenge right now in the clinical validation field is that our bricks and mortar system means that we just do studies surrounding universities, and we hope for diversity by having many universities. But basically, the same type of people live around every university. What we really want to do is get it distributed more pervasively. And so with the NIH support, we did a pilot trial of a mobile randomized control trial on depression. And if you look at the pie chart of the breakdown across ethnicity, social structure, everything, it looks like the chart of the United States. It's absolutely amazing that you're able to sample people in that type of way that we can't any other manner. Why we built this is to use this as a transfer measure if we did mobile remote studies. So what we really want to do is studies on hundreds of thousands of people. Right? That's the type of numbers we need to really make strong evidence of prescriptive effects. So we could do the lab deep dive, but if we really want to tell people that this is worth using, we need real-world outcome measures, and we need large, large numbers without all the selection bias that we're used to. The other thing that we're doing with ACE is in regards to our education project. So here, program. So here is ACE being used in classrooms. And what we're doing here is just sampling cognitive control ability across students. These are middle school students. So we studied, Melina Unkefer is leading this study. We studied 1,000 middle school students at the end of 2016 who played ACE in classrooms. And we're simply looking at how cognitive control metrics map onto standard academic performance metrics like math and reading. We actually know very little about those connections, even looking at the neural underpinnings of what drives them together. Then the goal, of course, is not that it ends there, but that data becomes actionable and guides a series of video games that the students might use, maybe even in the evening outside of class, to help normalize, right? So they could reach their maximal potential if they have a deficit in some ability, right? So maybe they're a B student, but they have, selective attention is not quite at the same level that their other abilities are. We would never, ever know that right now. So here's an ability to know it and then to target it precisely. The other technology that we're very excited about is virtual reality and motion capture. Who here has experienced some of the new head-mounted displays? Just so I could see. Okay, so that's getting up there. You all will within the next 5 years. These are now firmly in the consumer space, getting better, more accessible all the time. When you put them on, it is jaw-dropping to everyone. The amount of immersion that you can experience has finally reached the level that we can distribute it broadly. So That's something that we've spent a lot of time on. And of course, motion capture. The idea that you can play a video game with more than just your eyeballs and your fingers and your brain, but move your entire body. Once you start doing experiments where you see people moving, it's very hard to not continue to only do experiments like that. So now I'm just going to take a little time and talk about new games, the fun part. So we don't have enough time to step through all these. We have 6 new games. Over the last 3 years since the Nature paper, we have basically been building video games. So we have a large team. We have not done as much research as we normally do, although we're back in that now. And so all of these games, Body Brain Trainer, Engage, Rhythmicity, Virtual Attention, Labyrinth, MetaTrain, they're all targeting different neural systems that we're trying to optimize. They all have different mechanics, different closed loops, different reward systems, and different hypotheses that they're trying to address. So Body Brain Trainer is an integrated physical fitness, cognitive fitness trainer using motion capture with the hypothesis that if you engage your cognition at the same time that you're moving your body, if you're embodied in it, your outcomes will be greater than if you play that same game just sitting down, just using an iPad, let's say. Rhythmicity. The hypothesis is that many of our higher level cognitive abilities are dependent upon anticipation and precise timing, 2 core ingredients of rhythm. So if we can have a closed loop game that makes you more rhythmic, will we see improvements in working memory and attention? MetaTrain in the upper left corner, that game is designed using the principles of concentrative meditation integrated together with our closed loop system of adaptivity and feedback to see if we can help you better self-regulate internal distraction. And you could see with those 3 examples, it's not like we're just making stuff up as good ideas. We have meditation, physical fitness, and music, being around for thousands of years that have been used therapeutically many, many different cultures. The challenge for all of those domains is that it's very hard to do randomized controlled trials on them because they're not always reproducible and deliverable in the same format. Try to do a study in a meditation retreat center. It's really difficult to control. So there's tons of evidence. I'm not trying to downgrade the significance of those studies. But the beautiful aspect of this approach is that when you take one active ingredient, like the concentrated part of meditation of focusing on your breath, being aware if your mind is wandering, returning your focus to your breath, just that simple action, putting it into the algorithm, you could really deliver it in a very reproducible way and make a very well-controlled counter app to start pulling out the mechanisms behind it. All of these games involve a lot of work, so 1 year minimum for one of our development projects, usually 2 years, of bringing on art, music, story, all those elements, reward cycles, really trying to engage people. I think we'll understand a lot more of this over the next 5 to 10 years of the role of fun in this. I think it is critical that people are engaged bringing those reward systems on. And I can tell you, it is hard to make fun games. This is not trivial. And so this is a big part of what we spend our time doing. They all use different types of interfaces. So mobile, both MetaTrain, Rhythmicity, Engage. Body Brain Trainer, you could see in the middle, uses the Connect. It's a full body motion capture. The other unique thing about Body Brain Trainer, in addition to having adaptive loops challenge you cognitively at a personalized level, when you play Body Brain Trainer, you wear a heart rate monitor. And before you play it, we do a VO2 max, like the industry standard, to figure out your anaerobic threshold, where we want to target your heart rate. And so while you play the game, if your heart rate is below the target level, the game in real time just increases the amplitude of your movements, drives your heart rate up. If it goes too high, it titrates it back. So that's an example of multiple closed loops working together to challenge both physical and cognitive challenges. The game in the lower left is a brand new game called Labyrinth. It uses that device over there is an omnidirectional treadmill that it's called the Omni. It allows you to run in virtual reality. And the hypothesis there is that if we could challenge your spatial navigation in such a deep way, maybe we'll be able to see transfer outside of spatial memory to other types of memory. So this is just an example of the type of tools that we use. What we really think is that neuro-CrossFit training is going to be a big part of the future. I do not want us to step in the same footprints of the pharmaceutical industry and build a silo around every single product. It just doesn't make sense. We're not going to change something as complex as the human brain in a meaningful and sustainable way if we just look at everything in isolation. What's going to be more practical is that you're going to get an entire package of games that are personalized to optimizing you as an individual. So I really think that this is the direction that we hope to go in with our studies once we do the first pass. But of course, we need to figure out, do they actually work, right? Transfer is hard, we know that. There's an incredibly rich field of perceptual discrimination training and all the challenges behind transfer. But I would say that we have no idea what the limits of transfer are yet, because we have not built things at a higher enough level to really challenge ourselves and push ourselves there, and we have not worked out the ultimate way of validating them. So in addition to all of the development that we've been doing over the last 2 to 3 years, we've been working on how do you build studies that are double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled to do with games in this way. And I'd say that we have that working now. Our goals are always to look for transfer to abilities outside of what you trained on and then sustainabilities of those effects over time. But where we really spend our time is trying to understand mechanism and individual differences. This is why we're sort of doing our studies. And in order to do that, we use a very wide range of outcome measures. I'm not going to read through all these now, but if you were going to be in one of our studies, if you were brave enough, you would get all of this. So structural, functional MRI, EEG, stress testing. We use devices to do sleep recording at home, blood work, looking at telomeres and hormones, inflammatory markers. So if we think that it could change, we record it and try to understand how it changes. And my point is that this is one particular type of study. It is not the type of study that lets us go out and make prescriptive advice, and that's okay. There has to be multiple types of study that you work through this process iteratively, at each step gaining confidence to invest the resources to go to the next one. All right. I want to tell you quickly about this new entity we created called the Neuroscape Alliance. I travel pretty broadly, and I see a lot of interest in this, but not always the technical experience or access. And so we're creating something called the Neuroscape Alliance, which is basically a global affiliation of academic groups that share this common vision, that either want to have us help build a lab, share students, fellows, write grants together. So if you are interested in this, we already have sites in France and Switzerland, talking in China and Cuba. So this is something that we think is critical. When you try to engage with a company like Google or Apple, which we do frequently, you'll realize that you often feel like a charity case being an academic group, because these are massive multi-billion-dollar companies. But if we could create a global network of academic labs, we will definitely come in much closer to partners. So I think that this is an important part of the future development of this field. Okay, I want to conclude by going to the next step and think about what do we do now that we have video games, let's project into the future, that we validated, that activate networks selectively because of the mechanics of the game, that because of the closed loop challenge put pressure on them and change them in a way that's meaningful and sustainable. Let's say that's true. How could we use neuroscience, the tools, the methodology, the expertise that many of you have, and go to the next level? So I just want to tease with this idea of where do we go to advance neuromodulation and neurofeedback. In order to do that, we need to understand the brain better in real time than we ever have before. And so we have a new technology we call the glass brain. This was developed with many other partners, groups at UCSD, as well as NVIDIA, which supplied GPUs for the processing. This is my glass brain. It is a structural image in the blue and the gold from an MRI. That data has been integrated with real-time 64-channel EEG. So within 200 milliseconds, we're doing Fourier transformation, artifact correction, multivariate Granger causality, source localization. Then we bring all this data into our 3D video game engine Unity, and we have the ability to just fly through a functioning human brain, given the restrictions of both of these techniques. And right now we have this position largely as a call to arms of this is possible. We got to continue to push on real-time recording, because once we have this data, we have the ability to consider what real-time diagnostics are like, but also if we could record data with high fidelity and as much resolution as we can get out of it, in real time, we have the ability to ultimately close the loop. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to put all this together in one slide now and show you where the glass brain comes in. So it's 2017. You go to your doctor, whether you're 7 or 70 years old and you have an attention problem, you will get one of these, which has the problem that it's really a sledgehammer, right? It's just too broad and distributed in its action for our purposes. We're not saying that you have to get rid of this. We think that you could reduce the doses and then use a tool like ACE to understand where a particular person, an individual, most needs the benefits to optimization, to then prescribe a game, or more likely a series of games that challenge those networks in the way that we've talked about. Then the glass brain comes in. If you could record neural data, and we're very interested in doing this mobily, you could feed data into the game engine, right? Just like we do heart rate in BBT. What we think this will be is like a gamma knife, like a surgical approach to what we've been talking about, is where you could target not just based on performance metrics like how fast or accurate you are, but based on the underlying neural processing signatures. So that someone might have the same exact performance, but maybe one person is deficient in their attention, another one might be visual processing, motor processing. If you could feed that neural data into the game engine and use it to guide the reward and the challenge, we think that this might lead to even enhanced effects beyond what we get with behavioral performance driving closed loops alone. We're doing this study right now, pitting them against each other, seeing if we can target based on neural signatures. The other thing we could do is to feed neural data to drive devices such as this one, transcranial alternating current stimulation in our case, to in real time guide and make decisions about what type of rhythmic stimulation we might to supply to the brain. So we have a paper right now that's in revision showing that if you play one of our games while we're stimulating you frontally in the theta rhythm, which is what we found in our Nature paper was the most affected by gameplay, we improve your performance on that game over the hour that you play it compared to other types of stimulation. The biggest question is, does that lead to greater transfer, more sustainability of those effects? We don't know the answer to that. No one really knows the answer to that, and that's where we're pursuing now to see if we can use these approaches. And so what we wind up with here, and this is not now, this is the future, is a targeted to the neural networks that most need to be optimized, personalized to the individual and how they change over time, multimodal and closed loop experience. And because we always favor consumer devices, we're looking at something that for the first time could be done in real world in real time. As doctors, we always take these sparse snapshots of patients, in their office visits. The idea that we can be recording from home and using cloud-based server-side and analytics really changes the entire way that we can interact with people. All right, over the next 10 years, we will see how this can have an impact on all these different disease systems. And this is not a wish list. All of these collaborations have begun. And I'm not saying that we're going to change the underlying pathology. Frankly, we don't know. There's a lot of interesting data suggesting that amyloid is modulated by functional activity. But for nothing less, we build upon the field of cognitive reserve to strengthen these networks. So if there is an invading force, we'll resist the damage to later, which could have a massive impact on the quality of a person's life. And now, not just thinking about this from the deficit side, which is where I started, but more broadly for education and wellness. So I just want to conclude. These are some new slides just for this audience, just 2 slides about just bring us back to the moment where we are now. And I want to frame this from the Gartner hype cycle. Is anyone familiar with this cycle? So this is used in the tech world all the time, especially by investment firms, to understand what a new technology means in terms of its maturation and its engagement with the public. So expectations on the left axis, time on the right, a trigger event occurs. Usually some breakthrough occurs to bring something into public awareness. And then what invariably happens is there's what we call peak of inflated expectations. This massive rise built on just a couple of positive findings that lead to this incredible expectations of what we might find that then peaks and then almost invariably falls when reality approaches. We call that the trough of disillusionment. Then, if it's snake oil, it hits the bottom and we never hear from it again. But if there's something actually real there, then it rises at a more reasonable pace, the slope of enlightenment, where the methodical process of data accumulation takes place, and you start seeing, eventually, adoption, mass adoption, the plateau of productivity. This is how investors look at what a new technology, like virtual reality. You could go online and read about where virtual reality is in this curve right now. We're probably just past the expectation peak there as well. I would say the trigger in our field was plasticity research, right? It showed us that the brain is capable of changing at every level across the entire lifespan. We did not always appreciate that. It feels like we did, but we did not. And then, as we know, there was mass enthusiasm for brain training games of all sorts, and probably overinflated marketing expectations brought on by companies that in many cases had completely honorable goals of putting out really impactful things. And then, of course, there's critics, both of the marketing side, critics on the science side, the need for more replication, completely sound criticisms. I would say that this is the point we're at now. I would say we're at the slope of enlightenment. Maybe I'm being optimistic, but I think that we have really not hit the bottom. There is a signal there. There's lots of data that suggests there's something real here, that we can harness plasticity and that technology is an excellent tool to do so. We will rise up and eventually have these products enter the consumer space, education, wellness, and medicine. That's my expectations that what we'll see over the next decade. So I want to conclude with a quote. The first time I ever shared this quote. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think for this audience and this talk, it's really important, and I'd say it's our biggest challenge. So the quote is, at the heart of science, there is an essential balance between two seemingly contradictory attitudes: an openness to new ideas, no matter how bizarre or counterintuitive, and the most ruthlessly skeptical scrutiny of all ideas, old and new. If you're only skeptical, then no new ideas will make it through to you. You never learn anything. You become a crotchety misanthrope, convinced that nonsense is ruling the world. Some of you might be thinking, that's me. At the same time, science requires the most rigorous and uncompromising skepticism because the vast majority of ideas are simply wrong, and the only way to winnow the wheat from the chaff is by critical experiment and analysis. Carl Sagan. And really putting it all together in one quote from him, the collective enterprise of creative thinking and skeptical thinking working together keeps the field on track. This is our ultimate challenge, especially at the beginning of a new field. And so I would say be fearless, but be smart about your science, and always have fun as you're trying to change the world. Thank you.